positions.
Dr. Komolo, was this a bad joke taken too far? Because some of the claims, the illustration, him explaining what the government being like a company is, that in every company there are shares, preferential shares and ordinary shares. Where there is an AGM and shareholders do not vote or attend the AGM. When there are dividends to be divided, they are divided according to the number of shares. That is the truth. Those sensitivities that we hear, never mind, these are sentiments that were made more than a year ago.
I was telling my former president here that I think one of the biggest challenges Mr. Gachagua has is that he tends to overshadow his boss. And when you tend to overshadow your boss in a fractured country, then there's a risk that every small thing you say will be taken out of context. In particular, these statements, he made them, I think, early 2023, when the country was still fractured, when people were still politically very polarized and therefore very sensitive. But I don't think that making that statement alone is such a grievous thing, because the reality is that power has to be shared. And the reality is that in a tribalized country like Kenya, coalitions are built around tribes. Parties largely form or find a lot of their support base from tribal groupings. And those are eventually how power is divided. So it's not unusual that Western Kenya negotiated for 30%. I don't know what they got eventually. It's not unusual that Central Kenya will want more positions. And of course, other regions that are perceived to be opposition will want to come in. My bigger worry, and that has been a worry for a very long time, is that this conversation around tribal politics eventually take real oxygen from what we should be talking about, why people come into power, the real policies that Kenya Kwanza wants to implement to meaningfully change lives. So, for example, we are going to spend a month talking about impeaching Gachagua, and then, of course, we are most likely going to get back to Adani. And before that, nobody is talking about substantive issues like changes in healthcare, changes in education, things that then will bake a bigger cake, as Dr. Jong normally says, that everyone then can eat, even if you are not considered to be part of Kenya Kwanza and all that. So that's very unfortunate. But look, I think that if, on this particular shareholding thing, I think if Mr. Gachagua apologizes and explains himself the way he did yesterday night, I think it suffices. No point taking it too far, because obviously he has ambitions, and clearly he wants to consolidate his base in central Kenya, perhaps to use to negotiate later in life, in subsequent elections. But he also has this bigger challenge that very central Kenya has very many young, ambitious, upcoming political leaders. So he will find it rough. The likes of, I think, the gentleman from Kiharu, you know them, including, of course, Professor Kindiki and all this team. Obviously, they want to have his position and perhaps rise to the level of presidency. So already Mr. Gachagua has enough challenges from his backyard alone. And so there's no point trying to alienate, because when I was listening to this so-called public participation, I also noticed that people from central Kenya and other regions didn't consider this a very big thing. They thought it's not their priority. That's what most people were saying. So to elevate it to a point at the National Assembly that a statement made from what to me looked like in jest, because I first heard him talk about it somewhere in Kericho, and you can understand the crowd he was talking to. Now making it big national conversation 2 years later, where it is even clear that the context he was talking is already fractured. I mean, the opposition, as we are already in government, controlling, amongst others, Ministry of Finance. And there are already negotiations here. Informally, you've heard people say about other positions to be reorganized. So he has lost that already. No point making it a serious issue as a point for impeachment, because I don't think it has...
So when you say that he needs to apologize and explain the context like he did yesterday,
which he did.
Do you think Parliament is that audience, knowing that 291 signed for his motion, whether they had seen the motion or not?
There are several MPs have had to say that they signed to give him a platform to go and defend himself, which he will do today. But also we are talking about the same Parliament, some that ignored the Gen Zs until we reached where we reached in June, July, during that demonstrations. And I think I remember coming here and saying that I also underestimated the Gen Zs. In other words, I also didn't expect them to get to that point. I underestimated the public anger. So it is Parliament is not immune from underestimating the people they represent. It is possible the 291 MPs or even more may be underestimating the real conversation that people are saying here, that, look, this thing is not our priority. It is not like this guy has not done something that perhaps warrants discussion, but it is not our priority. So if once the gentleman comes and explains himself, and personally from a legal standpoint, I think some of them should be processed by other agencies before they get to that level.
Okay.
I think that in the interest of the country and the broader body politics, it is important that even if the president and the deputy are in disagreement, there's a platform for them to reconcile, and we do have several wise leaders in this country who can bring them together so that they process their differences in a manner that then does not fracture the country long term. Okay. And of course, the president has a discretion to choose his deputy, and that is coming up in about 2.5 years when we are going for another cycle of elections.
All right. So